All right, so the Olympic Games, they're paying athletes apparently. Like this is a complete 360 from what we just heard. I don't know if it's a 360. I'm going to break this down, but we just got the announcement that the IOC is going to start. Well, they've allocated funds so that athletes over the next the next Olympic cycle and moving forward will actually have access to a grant of $10,000. So this is kind of crazy because we saw all the controversy that the IOC president got into because of saying like she doesn't believe in paying athletes. We'll talk about that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to break down the details of specifically what was announced, who is eligible for this grant and this $10,000 out of this fund, and who's also not eligible, because it may come as a surprise that I'm questioning. There may be a few notable athletes who are like not eligible, at least on the track and field side that I know. Um, and then why this is also good, but then also want to talk about why this is not so good and what more can be done. So first off, let's just dive in and talk about this official announcement. This is directly from the IOC. So headline says, an Olympic first, the IOC to set up Fit for the Future Olympian grant to support all Olympians with USD $10,000 starting from Milano Cortina 2026. So starting from the Winter Olympic Games that just occurred earlier this year. So it says, for the first time in history, every athlete at the Olympic Games will be eligible for a new USD 10,000 quote Fit for the Future Olympian grant. Grant is very important. We'll talk about that. The grant has been set up to support the sporting career or the career transition of Olympians. This is also important. We'll talk about that. A fund of USD 140 million per Olympiad, so that's every 4 years, Winter and Summer Olympics, has been set aside as announced today by the chair of the International Olympic Committee, IOC, Athletes Commission, Paul Gasol. Shout out to the Lakers. So a couple different things to keep note of that we'll dive into. It's very specific about this being a grant. It's very specific about being set up to support the sporting career or the career transition of Olympians. This is very, very important. And then also a fund of 140 million USD, sorry, per Olympiad. So it seems like this is going to be something that's permanent moving forward and not just for this Olympic cycle from what we're currently working in right now with 2026 and 2028. So there was recent backlash, as I spoke about at the top. So earlier in May, this was May 22nd or somewhere around there, the IOC president, Christy Coventry, she was doing an interview with Sports Nation New Zealand, and she said, quote, actually, let me just bring up the exact quote. I'm not going to play the video. I don't know how I might get in trouble. She said, quote, I don't believe in paying athletes. And she continues, I come from a small country. I came from a sport that doesn't necessarily pay athletes very well. And I still don't think we should be paying athletes at the Olympic Games. Now, I do think we should find more ways to directly impact athletes, to find ways to directly help them on their journey to become Olympians while they are Olympians. And very important, they are finding ways into their new career transition. So remember that language that they had in the official release, right? It said the grant has been set up to support the sporting career of or the career transition of Olympians. So this kind of does indicate to me that there was some thought this was kind of already in the works to a degree, right? Now, this still was like terrible. She went on to say like, oh, they should appreciate venues, all that crazy stuff. But she said, I don't believe in paying athletes. And because I was so blunt and so straightforward, it was like, what the hell? Like, you know what I'm saying? And, me, Coach Rob and Aaron, we did, a couple videos and had a conversation on it ourselves. I did a video on it. Like everyone spoke about it when this quote came out. Now, about a week after or a few days after, she actually did go and quote unquote clarify her statements from the interview. And she was actually very specific. And this is actually going to give some context as to what they announced. So in her clarification, she said, some of you may have seen my social media posts about an interview I gave during my visit to New Zealand when I had a conversation with a journalist about paying prize money to athletes. When I was asked about it on camera, I did not repeat the words prize money. My mistake, lesson learned. She said, yes, I have always said that I don't believe in paying athletes prize money at the Olympic Games, as this would benefit only a small number of athletes. I do believe our role as the IOC is to find ways to directly support a large number of athletes on their journey to becoming Olympians at the Olympics and as they transition into life after sport. And all that stuff, committed to finding more ways, et cetera, et cetera. So that gives some clarification. But as she noted here, prize money, right? She doesn't believe in prize money. That's why this idea of a grant is very, very important as it relates to this actual new fund. Let's just dive into a few details as to what is actually being doled out for the athletes. The Fit for the Future Olympian grant complements the existing support programs. About 14,000 Olympians per Olympiad are expected to be eligible for a grant of 10,000 US dollars for each edition of the Olympic Games in which they compete. Essentially, every Olympic athlete who competes at the games, either the winter or the summer games, starting in 2026 with the Winter Olympics, and then also the 2028 games, and then after that is going to be a new Olympic cycle. And then it says this is going to be important. The grant will be delivered through existing National Olympic Committee structures. And so, from my understanding, this would be like the USOPC, right? US Olympic Committee. That would be the National Olympic Committee who would be delivering the grant. So IOC through the National Olympic Committee, USOPC, they would then be delivering the grant. That's going to be important. I'll talk about that in a second. If an Olympian chooses not to apply for this grant, their allocation will remain in the fund to benefit future Olympians. We'll talk about that in a second as well. There's a lot. Listen, the grant will not decrease or detract from already existing support provided by the IOC to national Olympic committees, international sports federations, organizing committees for the Olympic Games, or Olympics solidarity. So, but it's whatever. This is the first time that they're actually paying athletes, and each athlete is able to get up to 10,000 US dollars. So that's like pretty good. Just one other thing. They said that the IOC will now work on the application and the delivery mechanism for the grant with the aim of opening up the application process for Milano Cortina 2026 at the end of this year, at the end of 2026, with the first payments being made in 2027. One thing I do want to highlight here, before I talk about grants versus prize money, is this is Paul Gasol. He actually said here, okay, so he said, this is not prize money. This is about recognizing the journey and the commitment it takes to become an Olympian. They are reiterating this is not prize money. The reason I'm saying this is not prize money is because they are highlighting this as a grant. And a grant is very, very different than prize money. It's very, well, it's in general, it's very different. Like it could look very different in different ways. But prize money, essentially prize money, it could generally be spent however you want, right? I guess it's usually given after the fact, right? You get some prize money for competing, or you get some prize money for winning something, or whatever it may be, right? So, and it could be spent however you want. Now, with a grant, usually there are limitations and stipulations on how that money can and should be spent. And it's possible that the IOC could, in theory, put some limitations on how this grant money should be spent by athletes, right? So with a grant, for example, if you have like, if you get like a medical grant or something like that, right, for medical research, you can't then take that money and spend it on a Ferrari, right, to drive around, right? You can't do that because that's a specific grant for this specific purpose. And in general, you're supposed to submit, whether it's like receipts or, just details about where this grant actually is going to, providing updates and reports on the progress that you're making as part of whatever program this grant is going towards. Like there's usually specific stipulations. And that's why it's very interesting as they're noting this is, again, a grant. And that's why they're being very clear in general that find new ways and complementary ways to provide support to athletes with their long-term sporting endeavors or career transition. So it seems like they're being very clear. Again, in the comments that she made in her original kind of like, controversial video, she literally said them finding ways into their new career transition. She said it in her clarification as well, their transition into life after sport. Like, I think they're trying to make it very clear that this money that is going to athletes is specifically a grant that is going to support a specific reason, like a specific cause, your transition after the Olympics, either continuing with sport or into a new career, not just like, okay, you just spend this money however you want. So I don't know. But then I also don't know how the IOC would track that from athletes, because if they're providing that grant, athlete, and it's after the fact, right? It's not leading up to the Olympics. It's not beforehand. So I don't know how they would track it. I don't know how athletes would report. I don't know, right? Like, I don't know. So that's just a question, and there's still a ton of details. The other thing, athletes have to apply for the grant. It's not an automatic payment, right? They have to go through a process to actually apply, get approved, and then they will receive the money. And then, as I noted, who knows what stipulations they might put on that grant, based on or telling athletes how you can and cannot spend that money. right? Again, I don't know how they would check it, but it is what it is. But even more importantly, think of like the bureaucracy or the administrative, hurdles that they'll have to go through, right? All the logistics, right? That may lead to athletes missing out on that money because they just can't get through the process. And as I noted, the IOC is, it seems like, delegating this through the National Olympic Committees. So if you're talking about some of these corrupt countries, again, y'all know some of these corrupt countries in track and field in terms of like, okay, I got to go through my governing body to be able to get this money. They're never going to get it from me. And I'm not talking about the USA. I'm not talking about like these bigger nations, right? Like there's a ton of tiny nations that may actually receive this money or whatever process it might be like from the IOC to, provide this grant to the athletes. And they might make it even tougher for the athletes to be able to get that money. That's going to be an issue. That's going to be a very, very big issue. And what's interesting is I actually think this is pure speculation. The IOC making this a grant actually might have been strategic in a certain aspect of understanding some athletes won't get the money. So on both sides, one, talking about those logistical and bureaucratic issues that athletes might run into and they might just give up and not get the 10,000. But then you're going to have like the top athletes who are already getting paid millions of dollars, in whatever sport they do, and they're going to probably be like, I'm good on 10,000, like I don't need to apply. And that just sure, it remains in the fund, but then the IOC can tout, we have, in the goodness of these athletes' hearts, we still have this money, to provide to others, right? Like think of a Steph Curry or a LeBron James, right? They're probably not going to go through the process to apply for that 10K. Maybe, who knows? But like that's just more money for, at least, again, I know the IOC is not going to take that money. They're going to keep it in this grant fund, in this pot, but it is what it is. The other thing I do want to note is the criteria for who is eligible and who is not eligible. So athletes who participate at the Olympic Games within accreditation, et cetera, starting from Milano Cortina 2026. The grant is only for Olympians. Participants at the Youth Olympic Games are not eligible. So that's very important. I also think Paralympics is not part of this as well, from my understanding. But last thing, this is the exception. All Olympians are eligible, provided they have not committed an anti-doping rule violation or violated the IOC Code of Ethics, the condition of participation, or the Olympic Charter. This is very interesting because this isn't laid out very clear, and this could, I don't know, this could be like kind of murky. So, for example, is that like, let's say an athlete was banned for whatever it may be, whether it's you tested positive for, cheating, whether you didn't submit a TUE, right? Or whether, you had whereabouts failure, maybe it was marijuana, maybe it was like something else, like who knows, right? But if you committed some violation, then you're not eligible here. But what time frame is that? Does that mean only if that violation was found during the Olympics? Or is that like if it was found after the Olympics, right? Or maybe and it didn't affect your Olympic performances, or maybe it was like a couple months before the Olympics, so something like that. Or does this mean if you had a violation at any point throughout your entire career, does that mean that you're no longer eligible, right, for this? So, for example, we just saw Gudov Sagai. She actually was just banned, because she didn't fill out a TUE for taking something that was in relation to fertility, right, for her pregnancy, and she had to announce that she was actually, pregnant and giving birth to a child soon. And she is banned from June, I think it's like June 1st, all the way for another 4 months, right, throughout this year. So has no effect on like her previous performances, and we know the specific reason as to why that ban occurred. But like, does she now fall in this bucket of like, if she competes at the next Olympics, can she not apply because she has a ban on the books? What about someone like Sha'Carri Richardson? She has a ban for marijuana from back in 2021. Does that mean that, if she competes in 2028, she can't apply for this? There's a whole bunch of other athletes as well. Gudov Sagai, Sha'Carri Richardson, Tara Davis Woodhall. She had a short ban, like a 1 month ban or something like that. I forget exactly what it was for, but it wasn't for like full on cheating. It was just for something little. She was banned. Kerry McLeod from Jamaica, he just got banned and he's going to be coming back, before the 2028 Olympics. What about Christopher Taylor from Jamaica, right? He served a ban and he just returned last year. What about Fernando Manyala? He previously had a ban. Christian Coleman, whereabouts ban. Saweed Nasser, whereabouts ban, right? Like all these athletes, and obviously I'm talking about track, who knows with all other sports, who is actually going to be eligible? And again, this isn't laid out. All they're saying here is all Olympians are eligible provided that they have not committed an anti-doping rule violation. Again, is that in a specific time frame or is that throughout your entire career? I don't know, but that can eliminate a lot of athletes. So I don't know, but it's interesting. It's interesting. So one note, why is this happening now? People have been asking for the Olympics to pay athletes forever, like forever, probably since 1896 or whatever, right? But definitely in recent years. And even in 2024, Seb Coe, he from World Athletics at least, he paid Olympic champions $50,000. He was criticized by the IOC, right? The IOC firmly let its stance be known regarding international federations. So this is in the case of World Athletics, paying Olympic prize money during the first of 3 days of its executive board meeting on Tuesday. For the 2024 Paris Olympics, World Athletics became the first global federation to award each of its gold medalists with prize money, offering $50,000 to each event winner. So IOC criticized Sebco and World Athletics for actually doing this. Again, this is a grant as opposed to prize money. They are trying to make that distinction. So, but they've been getting a lot of calls to actually pay athletes. Now, who is actually going to benefit from this and who I think, it won't benefit from this or why there's still some problems. So this is going to benefit obviously every Olympian, right? Every Olympian is going to be eligible for $10,000, but especially Olympians from small countries, right? You're talking about those countries who have to invest a lot more money to get whether it's 1, 2, 3 athletes to the Olympic Games to just compete, right? So that's going to be a benefit for them just to be eligible and get the opportunity to get this $10,000. It's also going to benefit athletes in, I guess, quote unquote, less lucrative sports. And I guess I think track and field would fall into that bucket. So you're talking about sports like track that don't have well-funded or a lot of like infrastructure outside of the Olympics to fund and, support a lot of athletes. Obviously, track and field is in general just a participation sport, right? You don't even have to be what is professional. You think of athletes like who are in basketball. They have the NBA or they have leagues around the world, in different countries. They'll be eligible for this 10,000, but they're already getting paid from their different leagues, right? Same thing with in soccer, right? In football, same thing in like whatever other sports. So across the board. Now, will this actually be good? Well, yes, there are some aspects that will be good, right? The IOC has never paid athletes ever, like ever. They've never given athletes a dime. Now, other entities, whether it's through sponsorships, athletes have gotten money after the games, right? Olympic committees have been able to historically pay athletes after the games, et cetera, et cetera. But the IOC directly, considering all the money that they got, they've never been able to pay they've never paid the athletes. So even if it's 10,000, that it's good, right? It's pretty historic. It's also a general acknowledgement of the work that it's taken for athletes to get to an Olympic Games, right? Every single 4 years, all the hard work, all the blood, sweat, and tears that they've put in to get to the Olympics and to just compete there, let alone getting on the podium and actually medaling. Like that this is an acknowledgement of that, and I think this is beneficial, and especially for those small countries, as I noted. But there's some problems. I do think there's still some problems, right? $10,000 is not a lot of money. It's simply not a lot of money, and again, considering all the sacrifices that athletes have to go through every 4 years, like $10,000, athletes spend more than that every 4 years just to get to the Olympics or just to get to an Olympic trials. And obviously, we're talking track, but like any sport, right? They spend way more than that just to be there, right? So $10,000 is a drop in the bucket, right? Whatever it is, 140 million. That is a drop in the bucket for the IOC. And I've been mentioning this since, she made those crazy comments a while ago. That is an absolute drop in the bucket. They have more than enough money to pay more to these athletes, like every single athlete, just as they're doing now. You know what I'm saying? The other thing that's really important here as it relates to the money, athletes can't monetize their name, image, and likeness during the game, right? Because of the IOC's Rule 40, which prevents that from athletes, right? So this is not really a great alternative. Sure, they get $10,000, but the IOC is still making tens, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, off of an athlete through, and I'm talking about the IOC through monetization of that athlete. But the athlete can't actually make that money. So now just giving that athlete $10,000, it's like, yeah. And to be fair, sure, some of the top athletes who they are making that much money off of probably can't, don't need the 10,000. But what about those feel good stories from athletes from small nations? The IOC is monetizing those athletes when they can't make money off of that while they're competing at the Olympics after spending tens of thousands of dollars just to get there, raising money for their tiny nation to be able to, travel and compete at the games, right? Like that's That's why it's still kind of sketchy. That rule 40 that prevents athletes from monetizing themselves, especially in this day and age, like, come on, man. So $10,000, nah. IOC is raking in money off the athletes still. It's crazy. But this is interesting. It's I think it's a good first step. I of course think that they have more than enough money. Again, check out the conversation me, Coach Rob, Aaron Brown that we had. IOC has more than enough money. Like they definitely do. Like $140 million is a drop in the bucket for the IOC, but this is at least a good first step. I'll say a good first step. So it is what it is. Let me know what you think. Appreciate y'all.